Welcome back to Let's Build a Tetris-Like with Unreal Engine 5. Alright, so we're going to look at our Trello board right here, and I did kind of a lot last time, so let's go through these. Some of these, there's not going to be a lot of like development updates this time, but we'll start with this move player board so blocks align to XYZ grid. Now, the idea behind this is, let me get a couple Tetraminos and blocks down here. Let me pop out now. So the way I had this set up before was the player board was just at the world origin. It was at 0, 0, 0. But eventually all these blocks are going to slide up to the top and they're going to move out of the way. The player board is going to move forward, and then whatever the next set of blocks is, the next slice, they're going to slide down, and that'll be your new play area. Now, I was trying to think like what the best way to do that would be, and I kind of thought of like maybe having a different T array for every single slice. But I was thinking as the cube is being built up here, I was thinking every time you change the slice and got through all 10 slices, I was thinking about having it rotate 90 degrees and then slide back down. So it would make it more difficult to like see and remember, keep everything in mind of what's going on. The whole idea is that the Tetraminos, every time a new slice comes down, you'll have to adapt. You'll have to think on your feet and react to the board you're given, rather than just like kind of doing it by memory. But I thought if I did that, if I had multiple T arrays, then when I rotated the cube that's up here, then I would have to do like some weird stuff where the T array, like I would have to have like a 10 by 10, like lengthwise and depthwise. So width and depth, I mean. So it would just kind of like be an organizational nightmare because T array doesn't support three-dimensional arrays. So I kind of thought what a better way to handle it would be was just keep all of the blocks in this single T array of blocks in play, and then I'll query them by position. Now, the reason why I wanted to move the player board was so that this bottom left would be the 0, 0 position. It would be the world origin. And so then I would know that every single block would be at exactly 100 offset, without having to do any adjustments for no offset adjustments. So if this was at world origin, then this one in the lower left corner was actually going to end up being at like negative 400x, I believe is where it was landing. Whereas this way, now I know in the bottom left is always going to be 0, 0, 0. And then as you get closer to the front, y will be 1,000, and over here x will be, or not 1,000, 900, because we're starting at 0. So 0 through 9 and 0 through 9, and then on the z it will also be 0 through 9 right here. So that's the idea there. So small thing, but it's gonna make a big difference in how I actually query these blocks once they're in play. All right, so let's move on to our Trello. Oh no, that's source control. Let's move over to the Trello again. All right, so we finished that. Yeah, the next thing was the drop function. Now this wasn't a huge thing, but there were a few like small gotchas here. Why isn't this collapsible? There we go. All right. Drop. So all these code functions out. It's not going to be working in them. All right, so the first thing I'm doing is when you lift your finger off the input, I want to clear all the timers because this will prevent, like, even though the timers are very short, this will prevent them from moving like one last time. There's nothing worse than getting your Tetramino all lined up and then have the timer, even though you took your finger off the trigger, it just moved one more to the right or something like that. So I'm clearing all the timers, which will clear all of the movement that's queued up. From there, I'm checking if the Z timer is active and making sure that it is not, which it absolutely should not be since I literally just cleared all the timers. So this if statement maybe not necessary, but I figured why not. So then I'm resetting the timer manager and it's going to be moving down. But this time I'm setting it to the time between dropping moves as the pace. And the only real difference there is that the time between dropping moves is twice as fast as the time between moves. So it's already pretty quick at 0.25 seconds. But it will drop even faster. I wanted it to be almost instantaneous, but it would still, you would still see it move. It wouldn't just teleport down to the bottom. So that is the time interval. And then the only major difference about setting the timer here is that it's going to repeat. And it's just going to repeat until it hits something, anything. And then I have a variable that I set up, b. B is dropping, so the lowercase b is for bool. As I've been learning Unreal Engine, it seems like they like to prefix their variables with like b's and things like that, depending on if it's a boolean or not. So I'm setting dropping is to true. That I believe is a public variable. Oh no, maybe not. What the hell is it? So it's protected, but did I create a public getter function? Is colliding, is finished dropping. Aha, yes. Okay, so I don't have like a actual setter, but is finished dropping. I can't. Why is control not working? There we go. So this is my getter, but I don't care if it is dropping. I care if it is finished dropping in the player board. All right. Anything else I need to go into? Oh yeah. So all right. So we're setting dropping equal to true. Now, so if we go down to move down, this is the only one that is slightly different. I think we got to go into move. Yeah, this is where we're using if it is dropping. Move it down. If it's not dropping, we find the best rotation. Where are we setting? B is dropping. Oh, B is finished dropping. Ah, it's in collision. That's right. All right. So, every time we rotate or move, we're checking to see if it's colliding. And to do that, we're just looping through the 4 blocks of the Tetramino and calling is colliding on all of those. And in those is block base. So set colliding is bound to on component begin overlap. And it's being called on the collision box, the block collision that I set up here. So basically all this is doing is setting a true or a false if it's colliding or not colliding anymore. And that is what's getting read over here for is colliding. So this on the Tetramino side is just it's colliding if any one of the 4 blocks is colliding. Now, if it is dropping, if it gets here, any of the blocks are colliding and it's dropping, then we want to clear the timers again and then set is finished dropping and then return that it is colliding. So yeah, this is pretty much only here to handle the case for when the drop is completed. Now, over on this, we'll say, look for is finished dropping. So now this is in tick. In a previous video, I told the player board not to tick, I think. But this time I want it to. I changed it because this is something that needs to constantly be monitored. Oh, and another little trick, at least in C++, I think it's like this for all languages, but at least in C++, if you need to have a null check on something, and if that thing exists, do further checks on it, you can put that all in the same if statement. And so as long as you put the null check first, if the Tetramino is in play and the Tetramino in play is finished dropping, then I want to take all the blocks in play from the from the player board. I want to append all of the Tetraminos in play to it. So over here, we're taking all of the blocks and we're setting the collision to static, which itself is doing more than just that. It's taking the block collision, set collision type to world static, and then set collision response to all channels, or to channel world dynamic. I want to set it to overlap, and then for world static, I want it to ignore. And then when a Tetramino is in play, it's the exact opposite. So I want it to respond to world static and ignore dynamic. Because if you aren't ignoring world dynamic, it will collide with the other blocks that are next to it when you move it. And it just becomes a whole mess. So basically, if it's in play, it's going to respond to static. If it's not in play, it's going to respond to dynamic. And yeah, that's all this is doing. So that's collision. That's how it knows what to collide with, is based on these collision channels that I set up. All right. I think that's everything for this. Let's look at Trello again. As we covered the drop function. We're changing the collision to static. All right, and then that was it. Other than that, I just set up source control finally. I mean, this is probably something I should have been doing from the very beginning. But right now I'm just working on like a develop and master. It's probably best practice to like have features and things that you're working on and do branches off of master for that. But again, solo deving, it doesn't really matter. I can basically just have a dev branch, and then my comments are what lets me know what I was actually doing. So it just kind of removes overhead of having to organize entire feature branches and things like that. Since I'm just doing this by myself, it doesn't really matter if I'm working on a specific feature. I can just, work on something until it's finished, make a commit, and if it's working, move it over to the master branch. So that's that. And the very last thing, all right, so we set up source control, is set up Android debugging. Now, this was actually a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. There are a couple gotchas if you've never developed for Android before. I don't know how it is on iOS. I don't have an iPhone. Um, but on Android, there are some like kind of weird things you need to do to set it into a developer mode. And once you have developer mode activated, then you can turn on debugging. But on Android, you basically go in, you look at your system, you look at the About section, and then you just click on the version number of Android 7 times, and then it'll be like developer mode activated. And then you can click on the developer tools, and that's where you can allow debugging on your handset. And then once I did that, I had to install Android Studio. If you are going through the official documentation provided by Epic, it will tell you that you have to use a certain version of Android, but that is not true anymore. I just installed the latest. I had to install the SDK and the NDK, and then there was a batch file provided in the Unreal Engine installation, and you just run that and it senses all the settings, it sets all the paths that you need for Android, and then from there you just kind of close the editor, reopen it, and now every time I plug in my Pixel 6, it'll sense it and I can deploy to that. So now I can test on PC and mobile. The only thing I wanted to cover there was I had an interesting bug. Now, this is basically just something for like multi-platform development only. So if you're doing something similar, following along, I've said before, this isn't really a great tutorial, but so much as a devlog. But if you are trying to follow along and trying to make your own kind of Tetris-like game here, something that ended up being a bit of a gotcha for me that was kind of wasn't difficult to debug. I had a theory of what was going on. But where's the inputs? That collision to static. 1 sec while I look for it. All right, here it is in player board. So I put in a to-do here. But the bug is that if you get hit result under cursor, it will work on Android. I don't know how it is in iOS, but get hit result under cursor is mostly like a PC thing, but Android does have an invisible cursor that it's moving around as you move your finger. But when you lift your finger up, it will briefly change that input to 00 on the screen. And since I'm setting the input location based on a raycast from a 2D screen, as soon as I lifted my finger off the screen, for one single frame, it would move this hit result over to the world origin, which was 000, which is what converted to a 000 in the 3D space. So to debug this, my theory is that it was doing exactly that, but I couldn't tell. So what I did was I changed this debug sphere to have a 1/10 of a second display time. So that's why it's doing this like, tracer trail thing. And what that allowed me to do is when I was playing on Android and I would lift my finger off the button, it would, for one single frame, I would see a debug sphere appear right here at the world origin. And that's was causing the Tetramino to either rotate once or it would move one block to the left. Every single time I would try and drop, it would just go like, boop, just like that. So obviously that's not ideal. It's not the intended behavior. And what I need to do is have platform specific logic here. So here we have a get hit results under finger, and it allows you to choose, since touchscreens are pretty much all multi-touch sensors now, you'll get a certain number of indexes based on the finger. So for mobile, I'm going to want to use get hit result under finger, set the index to 0. Whatever your first touch point is, that's the one I want to use. And then that will stop that behavior. And then on PC or anything else that's using a cursor, then I'll use the get hit result under cursor. But I haven't changed that yet. I haven't checked to see what the best practices are for multi-platform input. So that's going to require a little bit more a little bit more study, a little bit more information. And once I figure that out, I'll make the change. But right now I'm content to just, developing on PC, and I can fix up the mobile stuff later. But I want to make sure that I put these to-dos in here as platform-specific issues come up so I know to go back and fix them. All right, well, this video is getting pretty long, so I'm going to end it here, but I hope you enjoyed it. I will see you in the next one.